Dad, thank you for being here. It's September 2019. You're 90 years old. You've had 66 years of seniority with our 69-year-old company, and we just want to really take the chance to get some things on film about our family and the company. And so thank you for enduring this with us. And so let's start right off with your father, my granddad. He grew up in Chester, South Carolina as a little boy. Tell us a little bit about him growing up, as you know about in Chester.
Good. And if we're going to talk about the company, it's really good that we talk about Dad, because really the things that molded him into the person he was is what really established the culture of this company and enabled it to really survive those first 5 years or so, the first 10 years. But anyway, Dad grew up on a cotton farm just outside of Chester, South Carolina. And Chester's a little town about halfway between Columbia and Charlotte. It was a typical early 1900s farm. Not the easiest living in the world, but he obviously decided early on that he did not really want to spend a life as a farmer. And so he, amongst 7 or 8 brothers and sisters, he was one of the only 2 that left the farm. But he was educated in a 2-room schoolhouse. One room was grades 1 through 5. The other room was grades 6 through 10. And he knew that he would never get in college from a 2-room schoolhouse. So he decided to move to Columbia, go to Columbia High School, and hopefully get a diploma so he could go to Clemson University. And by the time he was ready to go to college, the war ended, which was good for the world, but was bad for Dad. His dad, my grandfather, of course, all of a sudden, the product he was raising went down to almost no value, and he was not able to send his son, my dad, your granddad, to college. So must have been a tremendous blow. He just changed his whole life with the dream of going to Clemson College, and all of a sudden financially he couldn't do it. But there was something in him. He enrolled in night school here, Drone Business College, to get a degree from that. And he went downtown and started looking for a job. And he found a job with the bank. But he went to work for the bank and apparently did real well. He developed a tremendous reputation for integrity and for honesty and capability. And he just had a keen financial mind. He was in his environment. He did well at it. So he did that all through the 1920s. In 1928, he met a lady here in Columbia native, and was enamored with her and got married. My mother.
And that was what you?
That's 1928.
1928, okay.
And I was born the following year, 1929.
Right.
And he bought his first home in 1929, and we've got a picture of that, and with him standing in front of us, and all 3 of us standing in front of it. And I've often thought that farm boy must have thought he had hit the top of the world. Just a few years earlier, he'd been plowing behind a mule in a cotton field. And here he was in Columbia, South Carolina. He had a wife, he had a son, had a good job in the bank, had a good reputation, and had his own home. And everything was great. And then about a year or 2 later, the Great Depression hit.
Then came the 30s.
And the banks all closed, one of the first things the government did. So he lost his job, which meant he lost his house. And so we had to move back into a very small 2-room apartment. And all of a sudden, his world crashed around him. And then he met a man named M.D. Hicklin, who had a small trucking company. And I never understood really what fascinated my dad about that. Mr. Hicklin was a great guy, but he had about 12, 15 trucks, hauling truckload things around the city. Wasn't much of an operation, you would think, but he convinced Dad, maybe Dad became convinced that there was a future in trucking. Good. So now he's moving from banking, a world in which he was very familiar and very good at, into trucking with a very small trucking company. This was probably in 1939, 1941, the Second World War broke out. Mr. Hicklin, being a very patriotic man, was well above draft age, but he volunteered to go in the Army, as so many Americans did. And being a trucker, they put him in the transportation department, and then he shipped him to Seattle, Washington. And out there he handled the supplies going to the armed services in the South Pacific. But he stayed out there for almost 5 years. But the interesting thing is, when he left, he asked my dad to manage the company for him while he was gone, take care of all the financial part of it, and to send him the profits each month, each year. which I thought was a tremendous sense of confidence in a young guy. So Dad was still a fairly young person, and to turn his company completely over to a stranger. But he did. And of course, Dad was a man of integrity and of honor, so he certainly did that and did it well.